Hey everyone, I see folks tumbling in. We're just going to give everyone a minute or half a minute to arrive, and then we'll be getting started. This is Ashoka Live's Welcome Change, so you know you're in the right spot. And again, we're just tumbling in, so I'm just giving it, a few more seconds for folks to get in, make sure they can hear me, and eventually you'll be able to see Scott, our guest here. So we'll get started in just a few seconds. All right. Hi, Ashoka friends. My name is Simon Stump, and I'm with the Ashoka team. I am thrilled to welcome you to this, our bi-weekly series where we feature and talk with a leading social entrepreneur from our network about what works, what's next, and why they are hopeful. Today, I'm joined by Scott Strode. Scott's an Ashoka Fellow and founder of The Phoenix. The Phoenix is now a national network of sober active communities that offer free support to people in recovery from substance use disorder. And they offer this in the form of meaningful strength-based relationships, which I think we see so powerfully build this on a sense of self-esteem and competence through tackling things together. It's been, for me, such an honor to get to know Scott. I'm excited for you all to meet him. Before we dive right in, I just want to say a few quick notes in the shape of housekeeping, how we're all going to spend time together today. First, we expect to chat for about 30 minutes. So we're gonna move quickly and ask lots of good questions. Look out in the Zoom chat for links to Scott's social media, to his website, to his team's work. And also feel free to use the Q&A section so that if questions come up, that you too can share those and be part of the conversation. So all of that should be on the bottom of your screen, and you should be able to see me and my good friend Scott. So Scott, first, hi, and how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It's good to catch up with you and some Ashoka friends.
Awesome. Yeah, no, so good to see you. We were just before this reminiscing that 2 years ago, I actually got to be in your space. It was a different space than the one you're in today. But back when I traveled for work and visited social entrepreneurs on the ground, I visited your gym in Denver. Tell us how, you're not in the gym, where are you? How's the gym? How's the community?
Yeah, well, we're doing okay. Obviously like all of us, we're kind of dealing with the current sort of scenario that we're all managing. Which I can talk more about that a little bit later. But I'm here in actually our Boston gym,
Okay.
in sort of the reception area where folks come in and sign up to Phoenix on those tablets behind me and get their Phoenix gear over here. But it's a really special space. It's right in sort of the heart of the opioid sort of epidemic here in Boston, and we just wanted our front door to open right to the neighborhood that's outside, because that's where we can do our best work.
Oh, it's beautiful. If you remember, in 2018, my 6-year-old was also with me on that visit, and it was so sweet because it's the gym. Yeah, we walk through downtown, get to the gym, and it's full of like rowing machines and barbells. It's not the best spot for a kid who wants to run around, and your team was just so kind and so sweet with him. So
it's like a giant playground even for adults. So I can imagine
exactly.
for a little kid, it was a good spot.
Okay, awesome. So you've already previewed the fact that there's a Denver node, a Boston node, and actually, so after meeting, you went through the Ashoka process where we really got to know you, and we, being Ashoka colleagues, fellows, our global community of other social entrepreneurs, and you were recognized as an Ashoka Fellow last year. This isn't just because you had 2 gyms. In fact, it's that what you're doing represents so much more. It's a way in which we're tackling and changing systems, right? So tell us a little bit about what you were sharing with Ashoka in terms of how your work, more than 2 gyms, rises up to the level of systems change. What systems, what change?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think just to step into that conversation, I think I'll just share a little bit about my own story. I'm in long-term recovery myself. I got sober a little over 24 years ago. Actually, here in Boston. Phoenix wasn't here then, but I
Hmm.
was. And some people scooped me up and got me into a boxing gym. And there were some other people in recovery there. And that new identity I found as an athlete helped me let go of that identity I had as my addiction, being identified solely from my substance use disorder. And I started to climb mountains and do triathlons, and all the while healing a lot of the self-esteem wounds that I carried from some early childhood trauma that really drove and fueled my addiction, trying to numb that pain. And I thought, I want to give this to other people, and that sort of led to the idea of what became the Phoenix. And we started not because we wanted to build a national nonprofit, but because we wanted to sort of disrupt the space, in the sense that right now it's sort of this acute care model. You come out of treatment, hopefully you're cured. A relapse often happens right away, and you go back into a system. Whereas I think the intrinsic strength in all of us and the resiliency of the human spirit, when it's activated, can change your life and change lives around you in a significant way. And that's sort of what the Phoenix does, using the inherent transformative power of activities like climbing and yoga and strength training, but really the community you build around yourself when you're at one of our events.
And I mean, absolutely, it's stunning. I wanted to like signal how big this community is, and and I know now it's virtual, right? So maybe I'll ask you to sort of tee that up with with a nod to the fact that 2020 has happened. This year that we're living through, a global pandemic and all sorts of other disruptions, economically, culturally, have happened, and I don't know that there are people in this gym that you're in right now in Boston, right? So how is your community these days? And is it a network of gyms, or is it more this,
Sure.
practice, right?
Yeah, so I'll start a little bit how we started to scale the program to reach more people. We started realizing that for folks in recovery, we connected with certain sort of populations really well. Like we worked really well with veterans. So we
Yeah.
moved to Colorado Springs to interact with Fort Carson down there and help veterans struggling with substance use. We do a lot of work in the criminal justice space because
Hmm.
we're sort of trying to incarcerate our way out of addiction in some regards, through the war on drugs over the last however many years. And so we started kind of finding these different opportunities to grow and
Hmm.
scale. And people started reaching out from across the country, because so many of the people that work in and around the addiction space, other fellows will know this too, is that it's a lot about treating the symptoms, not the underlying why of the addiction, which I believe kind of stems a lot from environmental sort of traumas and stresses, and then also adverse childhood experience. But I think that when that little ember of self-esteem starts smoldering, it catches fire, and it just like changes lives all around you. So we knew it was special. We had people reaching out wanting us in other
Hmm.
communities, and so we just had a really low risk profile to scaling. We thought we'll go
Hmm.
into a community, we'll figure it out, we'll learn, we'll get better at it, we'll go into another community. And over the last 13 years, we've served over 38,000 people with free recovery support. We're now in 24 states and over 50 communities across the country. And the majority of those sites are volunteer led. And how we sort of stumbled onto that is we opened up an initiate tab on our website where like a small cohort could
Sure.
apply to be a Phoenix site.
Sure.
And over 700 cohorts applied. So
Wow.
we activated the top 30, went back to some funders and said, what if we could activate all 700?
Yeah.
And that's sort of the vision we're on now, except now we're thinking 7,000. So we
Hmm.
really are trying to sort of transform the way the country approaches this really complex issue.
Yeah. No, it really is. It's stunning work. I'm thinking, I mean, all of this, it's changing also in the COVID moment, right? I'm thinking of the article in the Daily Beast from back in maybe May, where your work gets picked up along with this other, I guess it's the headline that there's another pandemic killing thousands of Americans, and they're compounding and they're complicated. So it's, yeah, I mean, this must just be a heavy, hard year. And how have you pivoted to stay tight with this community when we're physically, distant?
Right. And like the Phoenix and Ashoka, obviously we're having this on Zoom, and we knew that we had to keep our people connected. Isolation for somebody struggling with substance use disorder is part of what kept us in our disease. And that connection they find at our programs is so special. So pretty much overnight we launched virtual programming. We started teaching Zoom classes. We had socials, we had coffee meetups, where we'd all just sip our coffee and show how we like to brew coffee, and just sort of anything that could keep bringing us together, because we knew that in that isolation, that disconnect, I really don't care for the term social distancing. It really is physical distancing, but we have to stay connected socially, because we are social creatures. And for folks in recovery, it's even more crucial.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about the pandemic within the pandemic, we have an increase of overdose rates because of this social isolation that's happening. We have an increased alcohol sales because, even if people were containing their alcohol use because they had to go to work, now many of us don't have to go to work because we lost that job. And so I do think that one of the sort of second waves that will come with inside of this current situation with COVID is the wave of addiction and sort of some of the despair that's around that issue.
This is actually something that when you describe how you meet people virtually, how you move into Zoom, it's hard for me just as an employee of an organization to have my home and my kids and my life featured so prominently all of a sudden, during my 9 to 5. And I was working from home even before the pandemic pushed a lot more folks into this environment. In your community, you're asking a lot of folks, I imagine, to show up at home in a way that is different than when you used to have a special place where you could practice being different, or build new relationships, have new experiences. And I just wonder, people like other folks are struggling with that, this blended public and private life. Is that landing differently? Is that landing with your community, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I kind of joke that there's more cats and dogs at Phoenix events now than ever before, and kids, because there always a cat somewhere in the background while we're doing burpees in a virtual workout class or something, And but what I actually realize now is that we were limiting the reach of Phoenix by not having virtual programs already.
Sure. Yeah.
And now we can reach into really rural communities, places that historically don't have a lot of funding around supporting people in recovery. And they can come to Phoenix events now. We've had people come from 7 different countries, to Phoenix. We're global without even really planning on it, just because now we've opened up this new avenue. And it's even gone so far that we have on-demand programming now we're able to get inside of prisons. So we pre-record Phoenix classes, and it's distributed on tablets in prisons that reach about 250,000 folks experiencing incarceration across our country. So they haven't all taken our classes yet, but we're able to see sort of how many folks engage. And the hope is that maybe when they transition out of the criminal justice system, they can find us in the community and plug right back into Phoenix out on the outside.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And actually, even the presence of, cats and dogs, we'll leave that aside, but the presence of kids, a lot of even your own personal story, you talk about roots in your own childhood experience. I know we've talked about ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences. Some of the, when you set your sights on that, this work becomes enormous, that much harder, but that much more important in terms of changing the trajectory of young people. It's something that you've is on the field of vision. I don't know how much that comes into your thinking of what's possible in this moment. Are you engaging kids and families? Is that just part of the identity that folks are allowed to step into, right?
Yeah, I think it's really, when you start really looking at adverse childhood experience and the sort of the higher you score in the ACE scale,
Yeah.
the increased likelihood of substance use disorder and suicidality and all these other things kind of coming up in your adult
Right.
life. You also have to believe that we can build the opposite of that. Like we can build nurturing and connection and healthy attachment, and that's really what we're trying to aim at with Phoenix. And I think that even though a lot of Ashoka Fellows and nonprofits feel like they work in a different space, a lot of time the underlying why is the same across all sorts of organizations. So the fact that now a single parent who's trying to stay in recovery can come to Phoenix and have their kids with them through this virtual platform is just amazing, because historically we'd have to raise money for a family and youth program and then deploy it in person, and but now anybody's sort of welcome. And you know, it's always fun to have the little ones jump into the yoga class or and you know, trying to stay centered in the meditation class or whatever it is. So
yeah, that's exactly it. I guess another question I have, which is and something else we've talked about, is you've alluded to some of the divides that you've been able to clear in general, and then with real focus in this COVID response. So urban and rural, you know, moms with kids, you know, versus maybe young single guys. But race is a big divide in our culture, and we're living through a reckoning with, in particular, historic and systemic anti-Black racism. And I wonder how you or your community or your programming, you know, sees this interfacing or connecting or influencing your work.
Yeah, and it's also been, I mean, as we all know, it's been sort of, you know, one sort of event after the other that has sort of both, you know, woken up, I think, our country in a very different way to awareness around the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our society, and sort of the principles that our country was founded on in many ways, you know. But I think for me as a nonprofit leader, one thing that I was really struck by is we're a peer-to-peer program. So it's somebody in recovery, lived experience, sharing, you know, how they transform their life through this activity, whether it's a yogi or a rock climber or you know, a social event. But we were drawing the peers that came into our program and helped lead programming from the recovery community, not thinking that the pipeline to the recovery community was already significantly flawed for people of color. Like the likelihood that they would ultimately get to the opportunity to be part of helping Phoenix grow. So we've decided to try to figure out how we create a totally new pathway that takes into account the fact that in some communities, addiction sends you to Betty Ford, and in some communities it sends you to prison. And if we just wait on the other side of this more institutionalized system that has all these threads of institutional racism in it, we will never make Phoenix a diverse organization at the level that we want it to be. So we're decided to sort of remake the pathway to our front door. You know, we're figuring that out as we go, building the plane as we're flying it, but I think we can get there. And I really, one of my friends always says this: if not me, then who? Right. So I think with that in our hearts, we're stepping up to the challenge of transforming the recovery landscape in the country.
Beautiful. No, and I mean, I hope you know you have lots of folks to work with in the Ashoka community and beyond who care so much about you succeeding in particular, in general, but on this particular issue in particular. I think this conversation has been beautiful, and we've picked up so many themes. I'm aware that in signing up for it, some folks may have like seen the word recovery, and we're using that word recovery right now to talk about an economic recovery, or we're talking about rebuilding and resilience. We talked about, you know, designing for well-being. That picks up a lot of folks working in different sectors. And I just wonder if in all of this work that you've done, you know, and this big need to recover or to shore up our resilience, that a lot of the questions around that a lot of folks are carrying, how you would speak generally to those values or principles. Are there lessons, I don't know, in your life or in your life informed by the work you do with the Phoenix and your community, that feel universal. So you credited your friend, right? Who has its,
Yeah.
but what would you offer, right?
I think that Phoenix, you have to be 48 hours clean and sober, and you have to adhere to a code of conduct while
Mm-hmm.
you're at events. And that code of conduct is really just a handrail that creates a nurturing community, because
And
we're
what's
trying to
the code of
create.
conduct include something like, just help so we understand like
Yeah,
what?
so everybody has different levels of modesty. We wear appropriate clothing, for the
Okay.
event we're going to do. We're thoughtful of others. Anything that's racist, sexist, homophobic in any way, threatening or transphobic isn't welcome at Phoenix.
Yeah.
Anything that could be perceived as threatening isn't welcome at Phoenix. So essentially, if it isn't nurturing, don't say it or do it. And it really just kind of creates the container for folks to be vulnerable and open up, and
Mm,
for the first time, talk about the most challenging things they went through in their life that either
mm,
drove their addiction or their addiction itself. And by doing so, you have this opportunity for the people at Phoenix to love you for all the parts of you, even
yeah.
the really complicated parts and the challenges that we've been through. And I think that those principles right now are missing from some parts of our society. Like when
Mm,
we think about the idea of equity and inclusion, we all believe that's a fundamental human truth. You feel it in your heart that it has to be present. But when people start like getting into sort of the symptomology of how that stuff plays out and how to address that, and then people pick their camps and their political affiliations and all these things, it starts to split us in
mm,
ways that I think if we could just keep the container about the key principles that sort of bring us together, the fundamental human truths that bind us, and try to keep our focus there, and then work from there towards the change we want to see in the world, I guess would be my advice.
mm. That's beautiful. Yeah. Uh, yeah, it's beautiful. And I feel like, uh, I, it's a thought, and maybe riffing off of that a tiny bit, how like we've had many opportunities, you and I personally have had many opportunities to connect. So what folks are witnessing is us tumbling right into a conversation where we're talking not necessarily about our personal truths, or me, I'll say, as much as we've asked you to share, but allowing for real deep and honest communication in a way that I'll say as a white man isn't super available to me, right? There's a group called Men's Shed out of Australia that says men connect best shoulder to shoulder. So it's rare that you can just sit talking about your deepest feelings and things. And I just see that in your work. I mean, the idea that folks sometimes looking at that really hard thing straight on versus side by side with someone else who might relate just allows for a different level of comfort or space to talk through things. And you've been so thoughtful. I think that's what these last few minutes of talking through the layers of building this and thoughtfulness in designing it have created that nurturing, right, and caring community. So you can really have these hard conversations or any conversation. I imagine there are lots of fun ones too that happen on the mountainside and the
Yeah.
gym.
And interestingly, rarely are we even talking about our addiction story.
Right.
We're almost always dreaming of what's possible in our recovery. And I agree, we find that sort of shoulder to shoulder, looking out over the greater adversity of the climb or the hike or the workout or the balance pose in yoga. But I think there's actually an opportunity right now for us as a country to use what we're all experiencing as a catalyst to bring us closer together,
Hmm.
not to split us apart.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna, I'll, I have so many questions, but I just want to just quickly mention to folks who are participating that we've already dropped some ways to stay in touch with Scott and follow his work on social media into the chat. But if there's anything else you'd like to know, or if you have questions, you can use the Q&A feature. The question I had went out my head as I started looking at these other really good questions that are coming in. I don't know if you can see them, Scott, but so there are some specific questions about how to get involved or to plug in DC. And I don't know, maybe you can just generally speak to
Sure.
that. And then we'll take a couple more.
Yeah, I mean, you feel free to contact me through any of my social media or go to thephoenix.org. to learn more, and you can contact us through the website. And if you're connected to this issue, or you have somebody you love who's struggled with it, or you have personally, and you want to help Phoenix reach more people, or you want to help us, you have a background where you could somehow help us build this sort of new pipeline of access that really, diversifies what the recovery community looks like, please reach out also. But essentially, if somebody has a passion for this and they have something they can instruct and teach, we can train them in the Phoenix model and activate them as a volunteer to help us reach into more communities. And that's how we grow nationally.
Another question is about how you might reach adolescents, younger people, or even just reflections on how to help young people navigate temptations, broadly speaking, but we're talking here about substance and substance use disorder, right?
Yeah, and that's where I think, ultimately, often, and I won't say all the time, but if we have that healthy, nurturing attachment when we're younger, and we live in an environment that doesn't have a lot of external threats, we can find that sort of safety, and we can go out and experiment as young people, but go back to a safe place to sort of learn and process. But for me, for example, I didn't have that growing up. A father with untreated mental illness and a stepfather who was an active alcoholic. And so I had to find it later in life, through the community I built around myself at the Phoenix. But I think, finding those moments that people can really tap into that belief in themselves, the self-esteem, the self-efficacy, the things that are really the armor against having to sort of, having that sense of agency in whatever situation they're in. That empowerment is like, it is fortifying. And so whether it's, getting that person into a CrossFit gym, or learning how to box, not to hit people, but just to hit the bags. And, I think there's a lot of ways with young people to help them find that. It's even harder now in a pandemic, but I'm also willing to help. If somebody has a loved one struggling, once again, you can reach out to me, and we'll leverage our resources and see who we know in your area to try to help.
This is so fun. I've had other conversations where I forget to look at the Q&A, and then it's only after we wrap that I realize there's like so much good stuff, and there's so much good stuff here. So I'm going to help quickly just bring a couple more into the conversation. One is this all sounds great. It must be enormously expensive. No, the question is say more about how much it costs. I think we missed an important point and a key piece of this model. So Scott, would you speak to affordability or cost to participate?
Sure. And I had my own journey of learning as a nonprofit leader around that too. I used to think we'd scale with these big buildings like the one I'm in Boston, and we'd have to raise $1.5 million in every city and then have a capital campaign to buy a building. And then I realized maybe we could do it just with 2 employees that are activating volunteers in a community. And then we found some donors that believed in us, that if we built a platform, like when Phoenix started, Facebook didn't even exist. And now the technology that exists in the world, if we could sort of use that social connection for, I think, what it should be used for, not necessarily what it is used for, we can actually open up an opportunity for volunteers everywhere to start Phoenix. And then we train them in the model. We help them learn best practices. We connect them to people in their community that could use the program that they're starting. And that way we can grow entirely with volunteers. So we went from 1.5 million, each year for multiple years, to 250,000 each year for multiple years, to the idea that the way Phoenix started was me with a bike and a climbing harness, taking some people in recovery out with me.
Sure.
And if we can find somebody else with a bike and a climbing harness, we can start Phoenix in their community. So, I had to challenge myself to find the lowest threshold for scaling that we could find.
And then that means for the participants, even subscribing to the on-demand classes, it's free.
It's free. Yeah. If you're 48 hours clean and sober, Phoenix is free. And, the way I also explain it is essentially for what it costs to incarcerate 3 people for a year, we can start a Phoenix in a community and serve thousands.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're just spending our
Yeah.
resources in the wrong places, I think.
Totally. Absolutely. We are at time, like just a couple quick final questions, which I think just really, I'd love to hear you personally, would love to hear you respond to. And one is just, how do you help people recognize that social isolation itself is actually the root of many, poor mental health, addiction in this case, but of other challenges. And then personal transformation seems to be a key component of your impact, which I imagine is a challenging thing to measure, right?
Yeah.
So what do you wish funders understood about the system's changing potential of the Phoenix, what you see to be true and the impact that you can create?
Absolutely. I think, we just knew early on we had to track this because it was such a different approach towards addiction that we had to measure. And what we really learned is emotional safety is the magic. That if we feel emotionally safe, we're willing to try different things, to overextend in a way that we learn and grow. We'll take on challenges that goal setting helps us heal self-esteem wounds.
Yeah.
So, it was really emotional safety was one of the key underpinnings. And I think it is tough to convince sort of funders. If you think of funding around addiction as paying for treatment, the idea that actually you need to buy a bike and go out with a bunch of people you can ride with, so you just see these huge sort of personal transformations. And then I forgot the first question while I was answering.
How to understand isolation is the root.
Yeah. And I do think that is one where we always say the heaviest weight in our gym is the front door. And when people get the courage and the strength to open it and come in, we have to meet them in a way that they feel comfortable and welcome there without sort of, being too energized and scaring them off, but also, sort of treating them as if they're inherently broken. Instead, we hold in our hearts that we're all inherently strong, and people pick up on that energy. And it just makes them realize that, hey, maybe I'll go back to that place. It was a great experience. It didn't have all the drama that came with my night of using a week ago. And I think they really care about me. And so it takes some courage to reach out for help when you have those mental health struggles. And so when folks do, we need to meet them in a non-judging way, meet them where they're at, and just meet them with love.
Beautiful. Scott, thank you so much. It's been so fun connecting and just seeing the energy of this group that's been able to gather real time with you today, and that will benefit from, catching a video recording or an article or something that might come out of this. So thank you so much for sharing. Really, it's been great. I just want to say before folks officially sign off, to thank all of our participants for joining today. We hope that you found the insights or an insight here to carry into your day or your week. And we want to remind you that we have conversations like this every 2 weeks. Scott ended by talking about the inherent strength of people in his community. Speaking of inherent strengths, our next conversation is about young people. And it's in 2 weeks, we're talking to 4 education innovators on rethinking school and how young people grow up. So be sure to sign up for that. Follow the links in the chat, share this with friends and family if this is something that you want to be part of your vocabulary of social change and your set of examples of good things happening in the world. So thank you all so much. We'll wrap here. Scott, keep up the good work. Really, really good seeing you again.
Thanks. Take care, and I'll see you at a virtual class maybe.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, this is I showed this before, but I have my swag. I just need to earn it, sweat a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah, it helps address the stigma if we wear this stuff out. So
yeah, we never talked about the shirt, but absolutely. So if you see folks out with the Phoenix gear, give them, what do you do? Give them a elbow bump these days?
Yeah, elbow bump until we can give a high five.
Okay,
so
awesome.
We'll be back there soon enough. So
soon enough. Thanks so much. Yep, have a good one. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.